Glenn, how are you? It's been a long time since we blogging heads, whatever it's called. We blog together.
It's true, it has been. I'm doing well. Let's just introduce ourselves. I'm Glenn Loury with Brown University and bloggingheads.tv here at The Glenn Show with Josh Cohen, who will tell you his affiliations.
So I am on the faculty at Apple University, and I am editor of Boston Review. And I have taught for a long time at MIT, and then I taught at Stanford, and just recently left Stanford to be full-time at Apple University.
Well, that sounds like a real exciting thing to be doing for Apple. Getting the likes of you, as well as for a guy like you who's been in the academy all of his life. And, I guess there are no students over there, huh?
Well, Apple being Apple, I won't talk too much about.
Oh,
it's internal education.
No problem.
We do.
I'm not trying
Apple
to make
University,
trouble.
we do. No, it's internal education, and it's yeah.
Okay. Sounds like the world will be a better place in any case for your being involved in that activity. At least I'd say so.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been doing it for a few years now. Finally decided to quit the job. So.
It has been a long time since you and I talked at Blogging Heads, and I want to note for the record that it was you, Josh Cohen, who introduced me to the Blogging Heads site and to this particular activity. So many years ago, after I'd done some lectures on the criminal justice and race theme, and you thought they were worth talking about, so I came on, as it were, as your guest, and hit it off so well with the Blogging Heads that I'm now, anchoring the Glenn Show. Which was not my idea, by the way. I want the audience to know that the choice of the name was not my idea. I just went along for the ride.
I'm along for the ride with you now, and happily along for the ride.
And it's been, it's been almost 7 years since that fateful inauguration was undertaken. So, and I'm very happily ensconced at Blogging Heads, although I haven't been doing many episodes of late, but with teaching and travel and other things sort of overtaking me. But we're doing one right now, so that's really great.
Happy to be here again. Yeah.
So on our list of topical subjects to address, you, a political philosopher, me, an economist and social critic, writing about race and inequality, amongst other things, is the continuing fallout from the incident in Ferguson, Missouri, where Officer Darren Wilson shot to death the unarmed African-American Michael Brown, which incident occasioned protest and demonstration and much, political machination. A lot's been written about it, a lot's been said about it. There's a grand jury that is deliberating as we speak here. Some of those deliberations, at least parts of them, have been leaked to the press, so there continues to be public discussion about this issue, about what exactly happened between the police officer and the unarmed young man on that fateful occasion. And more generally about this issue of race in American urban spaces and policing and profiling, the killing, some are inclined these days to say the murder of black men, because there are many such cases. There's not only Michael Brown, there are others. They come up from time to time. We are likely not to have seen the last of them. I say that not with the hope that I'm right, with the hope that I'm wrong, but with the likely prospect that I'm not. And it raises a number of questions I think might occupy us. And one of them is the extent to which the civil rights movement, the black freedom struggle, could be another way of putting it. I think that might be the way our friend Cornel West would put it, is affected by events of this kind, by this event, which become kind of focal. They become, events around which organizing can take place and people can be galvanized and their energies perhaps channeled. One thinks of analogies, Occupy Wall Street or whatever. You have a financial crisis and you get people into the streets, things start happening, they take on a life of their own. So here we have this incident, which is not isolated and which can be used to frame a broader set of criticisms about policing, about racial justice, and about inequality in the society. And it just raises questions. At least in my mind, it raises questions. I mean, the way I'd like to put it could fit on a bumper sticker. This is expressing my concern, and that is that Michael Brown is not Rosa Parks. I say that to invoke Rosa Parks, the heroine of the Montgomery bus boycott, the woman who would not give up her seat in an era of Jim Crow segregation and whose act of defiance, whose courageous act of defiance was catalytic in launching what ultimately became a transformative movement in American politics of profound historical significance. And when I say Michael Brown is not Rosa Parks, the worry that I'm trying to give voice to is a sort of disquieting feeling that I have. Not about the character of this particular individual. Did he smoke marijuana? Did he rob a convenience store or whatever? Did he push the officer and somehow provoke his own demise? But rather about the movement, about what the movement might be about exactly what the nature of the claims are, about how this can be converted into ordinary politics that can then result in, real improvement in the quality of American democracy and in the lives of people who live in communities like Ferguson, Missouri. So I have these questions. I really don't have a declaration to make about it.
If we think about the remark that Michael Brown may not be Rosa Parks to be taken in a different way, I think, than the way you're intending it, which I think you noted, which is, Rosa Parks was, a good person and a dedicated activist, and Michael Brown, who knows about Michael Brown? But I think if I understand it, the concern you're voicing, and I share it, is that what Rosa Parks did was not put herself, she wasn't the issue. What she did was raise in a very sharp way the issue of racial apartheid, racial subordination, and that was the issue. In the case of Michael Brown, there's endless speculation about what exactly happened and who stepped where, when, and why is there, blood, inside the police car. But there are some people, including who have tried to say, this is not about Michael Brown. And what I don't think has happened so crisply is a statement about what the issue is, what it is about, what are the. So in the case of, you mentioned Occupy.
Yeah.
Occupy was, I think, incredibly successful at crystallizing the issue of income inequality. And I think if you compare, I haven't looked at the survey results on this, and maybe what I'm about to say is not exactly right. Certainly my impression that if you look pre and post Occupy, income inequality, income and wealth inequality went from being, very marginal issues on the political agenda to things that it was possible to talk about as if they were what they are, which is central issues in American political economy. And what I don't think has happened yet, I hope it does happen, I don't think it's happened yet, is the events surrounding the killing of Michael Brown have crystallized in a movement which has the kind of clarity focus that occupied the idea of an economy, society dominated by the top 10% of the top 1%. So even, if you ask people what's the Michael Brown issue, I don't think it's crystallized around the issue of mass, highly racially inflected incarceration, for example, to go back to that topic that started us off on,
Right.
And persists in as intensively as it did maybe 7 years ago, or around issues about economic success and employment. Who's got jobs? What kind of jobs are they? So a mix of an economically focused people with jobs and something about incarceration, one or the other or both of those. I don't think that, maybe you have a different impression. I don't think that's happened. Instead, there are lots of people who make themselves amateur experts on the exact sequence of events that took place in that awful day.
Right. I agree with the observation you're making that so far all of the activity around the Michael Brown protest have yet to crystallize, congeal around some clearly articulated and remediable kind of policy agenda, something like that. I mean, you say it's not about Michael Brown, or Cornell says it's not about Michael Brown, but in a way it is about Michael Brown in the sense that it's about what exactly happened. The issue is supposed to be excessive police violence against young black men, the murder, the execution, in the more extreme language, of young black men. Police who have this awesome power in their confrontation with citizens on a dark street, where there's no one to whom they are accountable, where they can make life or death decisions and then perhaps cover their tracks if they make the wrong decision, or if they make an evil and simply a badly motivated action, they can still try to make it into something else. And so it really depends on what happened. He's unarmed. He's, as it were, innocent. On the other hand, if indeed he did attack physically the police officer, and the police officer was fearful of his own personal safety, maybe even of his life, then the police officer would have been, quote, justified, close quote. I guess that's what the grand jury is supposed to determine. So you've either got a case in which this evil, unrestrained police violence, belligerence, the murder of young black men on the streets of American cities is exemplified in this particular instance, or you don't. And the ambiguity of that and the sensitivity of that to a specific factual circumstance, and then the conflicting testimonies, and what's being reported in the newspaper is that several, maybe as many as 8 African-American witnesses testifying before the grand jury have confirmed broadly the officer's account of what took place there, but have heretofore not come publicly to say so because they fear for their own safety. I mean, they don't want to be the ones countering what has now been embraced to be the narrative about those events. So everything is turning on the narrative about those events, about the events about which we are uncertain, where it could be plausibly claimed that the helpful narrative from the movement's point of view is not in fact what took place. And should that be demonstrated to be the case, the movement would thereby be discredited. It would be a movement on behalf of, some kind of vacuous or sort of fantasy kind of envisioning of the reality, and not the reality itself. So that's one of the things that kind of troubles me. And I know I'm going on for a bit, Josh. If you want to speak, I can.
It's okay. It's a complicated and hard issue, and I think the points that you just raised are very important. I want to be very clear about one thing. When I don't mean to be in any way dismissive of the issue of what exactly happened. I think Officer Wilson, Darren Wilson, is owed a fair hearing. May not get to the trial. I was going to say a fair trial. It may not get to the point of there being a trial. I don't presume to know what happened, and I object to this expertise from a distance where people read the latest account of what happened, and there's endless speculation about it. I think it's part of that kind of bullshit political culture, political discourse that we're in now, and we may get further down this road when we get to some of the Ebola issues. So I don't presume to know, and it may well be that close inspection of the facts shows that Wilson was appropriately fearful for his life. I had my suspicions about that. I think the suspicions are reasonable. I think anybody should have some suspicions about that. But I think the issues that you mentioned about police power, about mass incarceration, the issues of racial inequality, both as an economic reality and a coercively enforced reality of mass incarceration. Those issues remain, and I think it would be, and if those issues weren't there, if it weren't for the massive economic inequality in Black and white America, and for the highly racially reflected system of mass incarceration, we wouldn't be in this conversation.
That's right.
That's the conversation that needs to happen. That's the kind of conversation that is not just a conversation, but movement. And that's what happened with what Occupy was somewhat successfully able to do, and I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
Okay. So here's what I think may be a difficulty, because I want to agree again that the goal should be to draw a line between incidents such as this, tragic incidents such as this, which to the extent that that officer did overstep are appropriately objected to with the degree of vigor that has been expressed in and around Ferguson, Missouri. It ought to get people out into the streets. They ought to be damned mad about it, because to the extent that the officer overstepped and extirpated that young man's life without sufficient reason, that's an outrage. It's an outrage to which objections should be raised. There's a difficulty that I see. If the goal is to draw a line between incidents such as this and the larger questions of social structure, of social justice viewed over even, generations of time span, of inequality, not just with respect to percentages of income, but with respect to communities that are isolated and marginalized, and reproduce that marginalization across general, inequality that is etched into the very physical space of the city, with people being concentrated here or there, no-go zones, and all the rest. To that extent, we have to go through some difficult territory, it seems to me. That is to say, for example, mass incarceration. I mean, look, most of the guys, they're mostly guys, most of the people who were serving time in prison actually broke the law. They committed a crime. Not all of them, but most of them. I would dare say the vast majority of them. Should they be sentenced for 25 years to life or whatever? No, I would make the sentences much shorter. Should they just be marking time in a room full of bunk beds where there's no development or educational program? No, they should be treated like human beings and prepared to reenter society. Should they be scarred for life, not being able to vote, not being able to apply for a Pell Grant or live in a public housing facility because of their criminal records, so not be able to find a job? No, they should be allowed to reenter society and live decently. But the fact is that most of them will have transgressed. And it seems to me the difficult territory, and now I'm trying to draw a line between Michael Brown on the one hand and mass incarceration on the other.
Let me just put just add
yes.
a point to what you just said, which is accepting that they transgress, and you can debate whether or not the transgressions were of laws that shouldn't have been on the books in the first place. But putting that issue to the side, although it's an important issue because of the extent of these being drug crimes. But putting that issue to the side, they transgress and then lack the resources that other people who transgress have to get reasonable treatment. So it's the issue of transgression. I don't think the issue of transgression
straightforward
is the only issue. I mean,
yeah. Okay. No, I accept. I mean, thank you. In fact, those are both friendly amendments to my little speech. Exactly. Some of those laws don't make any sense, and we really have over-criminalized, especially on the drug front. And you're quite right. They're plea bargaining with district attorneys. They don't have the good legal representation. They end up getting the short end of the stick more often than not. And there's a lot of injustice, unfairness, and inequality that's baked in the cake here. That's all true. So having acknowledged that, excuse me, I'm trying to get to this point about transgression. I'm trying to get to this point that maybe Michael Brown wasn't a choir boy, and maybe he smoked reefer every day. Maybe
good for him. Good for him. I don't exactly mean that, but you know what
I know what you mean. Maybe he strong-armed that cigarello pack out of that store, and maybe that wasn't the first time he did it. And, gentle giant might not be the way that some of the people who had to deal with this hulking, almost 300-pound guy thought of him. They might have thought of him as a SOB. I don't know. So the path to the larger social critique, should it be anchored to events like what happened in Ferguson, Missouri between Darren Wilson and Michael Brown, takes us through this territory where we have to reckon with transgression by black people, disproportionately, and in spaces where transgression is often the norm, where people who live there fear for their own personal safety, where police officers who go in there know that they could end up getting in trouble, and that trouble could end up with them losing their lives. Those are not fantasies in their minds. Those are thoughts based upon real events that may well have taken place. And for me, therefore, the crux of the matter is convincingly making the argument that notwithstanding the possibility of such transgression, the question of justice does not end with prosecuting the transgressor. And the responsibilities that are entailed, social responsibilities that are entailed by situations in which transgression is widespread, do not extend only to the individuals who may be involved in whatever wrongful acts end up getting them imprisoned or lead them to confrontations with police. We are entailed somehow. When I say we, I mean the collective body, the political body is somehow entailed, has responsibilities because the conditions within which the lives of these people lead them into these acts of transgression, to the extent that they do so, are conditions for which we're responsible. And saying that doesn't make these people not be free agents with the capacity to choose otherwise. It simply observes that if you put any body of people under such conditions, you would be likely to observe one or another manifestation that would be transgressive to the normative frame that the rest of us take for granted within the society. So it seems to me that that's an argument that has to be made, and to require that Michael Brown be thought of as a choir boy, the gentle giant, in order to get traction in my political critique, seems to me to be starting from a very, very weak hand. To require that the mass incarceration is an arrest of innocents who've done nothing wrong and about whom grave injustices have been done, seems to me to be, starting out with two strikes against oneself if one wants to be effective in making a reformative political argument.
I agree 100% with what you said. I think it's extremely important. And I probably just repeating what you said, but putting it in different words. but anyway, I just want to identify myself with. I think there are two issues. One is with respect to incarceration. One issue is, did somebody do something that violates the law? And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's not like a drug law, where we're suspicious about its appropriateness or legitimacy. But it's a law that we think belongs on the books. Did the person do something? Are they responsible for having done it? That is, are they the agent who did the thing? That's one issue. But then there's another issue, which is what's the appropriate division of responsibility in response to circumstances of legal violation. And one question is, you say, did the person do the thing? And the other thing you do is you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, is there a collective responsibility, a shared responsibility, a collective responsibility in a democracy? It's supposed to be a society of equals. Is there a collective responsibility? Answer, yes, for ensuring reasonable and decent conditions for everyone. Is that responsibility discharged? No. And moving forward, I think it's a key to moving forward in a sensible, responsible, and appropriate way on these issues, to be able to handle both of those thoughts at the same time. The fact that there's a collective responsibility and that responsibility is not being discharged doesn't turn people who violated laws, including reasonable laws, into angels, and it doesn't absolve them of responsibility. At the same time, the fact that they violated the law and that somebody else didn't violate the law doesn't mean that these issues about shared collective responsibility, which is what democracy is about, exercising that shared we the people power to ensure decent conditions for everybody, doesn't mean that it's somehow inappropriate to raise that issue. It's the beginning of being long-winded and not very precise here, but I think the beginning of an appropriate response to circumstances like this is to be able to hold those two thoughts in mind at the same time. And I don't hear a lot of that. I hear it from you, and as I said, I meant in my own little sermon there to be identifying myself with what I understood you to be saying. I hope I got it right.
Yeah, you definitely got it right. Even though you did repeat my major points, you did so in your own words, and I'm glad to glad to have the reiteration.
Well, that was what I was trying to do.
but let me just offer something here, because I take the general point that we're making, which is this distinction between individual and collective responsibility, and this observation that you can still have a social justice claim that, for example, the racial disproportion and the sheer scale of incarceration of young Black and brown Americans, and you can still have a valid point about social justice, even while acknowledging that at down underneath what's going on, there are enough individual wrongful behaviors that may be entailed in that against violence and depriving people of their property and all this kind of stuff. And so I want to focus on a particular aspect of this, which I think is really important and exemplified by the Ferguson, Missouri situation, and that's the relationship between the police and the communities that they serve, including bad, quote unquote, bad communities, communities where there's a lot of crime, where the police are fearful. And one of the things that I find most disturbing in the Ferguson, Missouri brouhaha is people getting locked in, people on both sides, people on the left and the right, getting locked into this opposition between community and police, as if the police were the enemy, almost by definition, they're cops, and that's said with a sneer, and as if the community was full of thugs, which is what some police officers may be saying and what many people whom I'm observing supportive of the police officer. I understand that police officers in the St. Louis area are going around with, like a wristband or something saying, "I am Darren Wilson," because they're identifying, with the cop who's under potential indictment in this situation. And we know that many of the demonstrators have, with the hands up, don't shoot, and with their various anti-police activities that they've engaged in at these demonstrations, throwing of bottles, and the police and the way in which they've treated demonstrators, including coming out in militarized vehicles early on in the process. The officer who was seen, basically telling people to go F themselves at some point in the altercation, all that. This, to me, is tragic. Okay, the community needs the police. They need the police. Okay? The police work for the community, not just the white, upper middle class, suburban homeowners. They work for everybody. In the jurisdiction that they are hired to serve. They are servants of the people. Those people are their clients. Even the ones who don't speak particularly good English, who haven't had a job in 3 years, who hang out with a 40-ounce beverage in a brown paper bag in front of the convenience store, who are seen in the alleyway smoking a joint, whatever. The ones who have come back from 3 years upstate and are living in that community, every single one of them is the client of the police officer. The police officer is there to serve those people. So, it's a very bad state of affairs when the police view the community with contempt. That is unprofessional, and it ought to be a first-order matter of rectification by the responsible authorities. And it is also not at all a good thing for the community to view the police as their enemy. Now, who's responsible for that? Perhaps the police have to bear the bulk of the responsibility, since they are the public actors in this circumstance. But I think community leaders, whether it be ministers or political gadflies or intellectuals like Cornel West who are activists, might want to pause before they just unreflectively embrace this narrative that the police are implacably the enemy. The community needs the police. The maintenance of order is the first business of the government. And the reality of disorder is palpable in some quarters of our society that are occupied by poor Black and brown people. So it seems to me.
Well, I agree with you that the community needs the police, and it's partly for that reason that the abuse and exploitation by some cops of their power is so awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there are many reasons why it's awful, but one of the reasons is that it's awful to abuse power. Another is that it's awful to abuse power when you're supposed to be the servant, rather than the master. But another reason that it's awful to abuse power is that you're undermining the relationship of trust and confidence that's essential for effective policing. And since, as you say, the community needs police, it's a really terrible thing, multiple terrible things to do.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to another topic.
Well, we solved that one, Glenn.
We stirred the pot. I think we effectively put some things on the table that people can think about.
But I think I think the main thing is this thing about, kind of, a sense of personal responsibility. You did it. Don't blame somebody else for it. You did it. You did it. Somebody else didn't do it. There are circumstances. It's really critical to be able to have that gone alongside of being able to look in the mirror and say, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing
as a society.
Yeah.
Good summary. So, the coming Republican wave. You're a political scientist, amongst other things.
Yeah. Well, on these, I said this before in a long time ago in some previous blogging. On these matters, as on many other things, I probably am more inclined to have, trust and confidence in experts than other people are, or maybe than I have.
Yeah.
So when I want to find out what's going to happen in the midterm, let's say in the Senate election, I go to Nate Silver.
Yeah.
He's got a pretty good track record.
Yeah.
Right. Doesn't mean I want to go out for lunch with him, but he's got a pretty good track record. Right. And so I'd say I'm feeling about 60% more or less confident that the Republicans are going to win the Senate. I think that's terrible. And I don't say that out of a position of love to the Democrats or the Republicans. But the idea of spending the next 2 years with endlessly many efforts to repeal affordable, even more than we've already had.
Yeah.
The Affordable Care Act, more likely to be successful than before, alongside fights between Republican governors who are not so hostile to it, and senators who, whether they're hostile to it or not, feel that they need to express. So the idea of spending time on that and without a Surgeon General, because the Republicans have nominated Senator too, but Surgeon General and an inability to appoint any judges, and probably with absurd proposals about budget cutting, despite the fact that the budget deficit is dropped very substantially. So I regard that, I feel about 60% sure that we're in for an even more dismal political situation than the one we're in.
Okay,
How about you?
Well, I want Nate Silver is on the low end, as I understand it, of the spectrum of expert opinions, forecasts. Yeah, his 60-40. I think the Iowa, betting market where people can buy contingent claims based on outcomes of elections looking forward is more in the up almost towards 70-30. At least they break it down by individual contests, but some of them are Anyway, so how about me? Well, of course, as a Democrat, I view the likelihood of the Republicans in control of both houses of Congress with fear and trembling, and that's not a good thing. But what I wanted to offer was is this really a crazy thought? The thought is that we don't have a parliamentary system. If we had a parliamentary system and a Republican wave were to sweep over us, the prime minister would resign. He would be replaced by another prime minister who could, run the executive branch in collaboration with the legislative branch in such a manner that things would get done. We don't have that kind of system. I'm not suggesting that President Obama resign if he loses the Senate. What I'm saying, though, is that is it really beyond imagining that the shock of, when President Obama came in 2008, the Democrats had control of both houses of Congress. They had a practically veto-proof majority not veto-proof, filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. A lot of legislation got passed, the stimulus package, the Affordable Care Act, and so forth. Now the table will have turned. The cumulative effect of 2010, and should it work out that way, 2014 would be the loss of both houses of Congress, huge Republican majorities in the House, a majority in the House, and perhaps a narrow majority in the Senate. That's a kind of repudiation by the voters of the Democratic Party executive. On the other hand, he is the president of the United States. The country has already gone quite a few years with judgeships unfilled and other initiatives, very important pieces of legislation from immigration reform on down, not tended to. That can't be good for the country, and even Republicans can see that that's not good for the country. What about a humbled president and a more mature Republican legislative leadership working out what they call it, grand compromise or whatever, working out a compact within which the president would have to give ground. He'd definitely have to give ground. And of course, not on the Affordable Care Act. I'm not suggesting that. That's something on which the Republicans would have to give ground. But working out a budget, working out immigration, sort of saying we're in a new political climate. And it means the president would explicitly acknowledge that. But it also means that the Republican leadership in Congress would say, no, standing in the gap and preventing him from getting anything through for 2 years so that we can then run for the presidency in 2016 is not a responsible way to govern this country either. Is it really madness for me to dream? If I could have my way, that would be, if we lose the election, that would be the sort of second best scenario that I could envision.
So I think there are two difficulties at different times. First of all, in describing I think he's given lots of answers.
Yeah.
Including in the way
yeah.
All sorts of policies, including the one that you mentioned, in particular, on the budget. So the levels of spending and the deficit now are both lower than the Paul Ryan budget, which the Democrats regard as a disaster. Well, the current spending levels are below the Paul Ryan budget. So I think there's a lot of ground that's been given. So on the scenario that you're describing, I think probably already happened at Scott Rand, the Massachusetts Senate dealing with this guy. But the other thing is that it's not clear to me that the Republican Party, putting aside some individual Republicans, it's not clear that the Republican Party as an organization is in the business of trying to figure out with chasing president what sensible direction for public policy is, and then enacting that sensible direction, as opposed to doing everything that they can to embarrass and humiliate the president, deprive him of whatever power, residual power he has, obstruct anything, because if anything happens, he gets puzzled. He and the Democrats get puzzled. So I'm not sure that so there are two premises in your scenario. One is that Obama, implicitly Obama hasn't given that up already. He has, so we got the Paul Ryan budget. And the other is the premise that the Republicans are interested in making constructive policy. I think that's I'm not so sure that that's true.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just being stupidly partisan. I don't think so.
No. Both of your points carry weight without a doubt. And if you were to judge by past history, the surmise that they're not interested in serious governance of the country and reaching a modus vivendi with the president so that things that must be done do get done, I couldn't contradict it based on the way they've behaved to this point. I guess my scenario might be expanded to envision someone from the center of the party who wants to be the nominee, starting early with what that person would have to do in any event, which is confronting the right fringe of the party in the primary contest and surviving, not getting buried in South Carolina or in the Iowa caucuses or whatever, or in New Hampshire, because he's not, or she are not sufficiently pure on the right wing to be able to get the nomination. That kind of work would have to start before you get to 2016 if you wanted to take that line. And the narrative of such a candidate, might be it's time for us to grow up. Obama was bad, but what's happening to the country here is not just a consequence of his being a bad president. I mean, okay, he was bad. We don't like Obama. We're Republicans. What's happening to the country here is the fact that we haven't governed, and we haven't governed in a while. And here are 10 things that haven't gotten done that absolutely must get done if our children are to have the life that we hope that our children and grandchildren will have. And this is always going to be a fight. Okay? Do you want the next Republican president to have to get nipped at his heels and carped about and stymied by a recalcitrant Democratic, plurality, or perhaps one day majority in these houses? So let's get started with this business right now. Here's a new vision for how to be a Republican, something like that. I mean, I can't write the speech because I'm not a Republican, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. I mean, and here's and I suppose in some sense, I wish that were true, wish that happened, because as little as I like the fact that we've already got the whole budget enacted, I like the total political stalemate even less. But here's a kind of data point in some very, very attenuated sense of data point. So consider the foreign policy speech that Rand Paul
I haven't read that speech, I must tell you, but go ahead.
Well, essentially, it was Rand Paul saying, not as precisely as he might, not with as much detail about maybe using military force or intervening, but essentially it was I am not a neocon.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, but the way he presented it was, I'm different from Obama. So it was, even though he was principally criticizing the neoconservative strain in Republican foreign policy and in Democratic foreign policy, well, particularly in the Republican the way the speech was presented was, here's how I'm different from Obama. And so if you're now extrapolate from there to a legislative setting, and somebody gets up and makes the kind of speech that you want them to make, it's time to grow up, it's time to be interested in making policy, not just being instructive. But if you extrapolate from the Rand Paul foreign policy speech, the way that comes out is, and the principal obstacle to our getting anywhere is the president. So we're not gonna do anything with him. So I even if somebody made the time to grow up speech, I suspect that it would be more in preparation for a 2016 run than as part of a legislative strategy for 2015-16 to actually get some stuff done on infrastructure, on energy policy. On continuing to push down the costs on healthcare, which are going up. So I'm not hostile to what you're saying. I'm not hostile to anything you say. I think it's a little more speculative.
Yeah, I think it's probably wishful thinking on my part. Your rejoinder is depressingly plausible.
Unfortunately, that's because of the general principle these days that if it's depressing, then it's plausible.
All right, Josh.
I'm mindful of the time here, man. It's
Yeah.
9:02.
Let's go. Nice talking with you, and we'll do
Great
it again.
to talk to you. Good to do it